Happy Friday! Wah! It's Friday. Oh, there's a puppy. Hi. Happy Friday, puppy. Happy Friday, everybody, including puppy. Look at that pup. Wagging his tail. Farmhouse says TGIB, TGIP. Is that just for Bennebic and puppy? No Friday? Yes, Bennebic and puppy. Okay. He wants treatos. He wants treats. That's why he's sitting there so expectantly. So, I should probably give him some kind of treat. Let's see, I see that Go With Him in the chat again, as well as Sophical and Sharkies. Hi, Sharkies. Happy Friday. Hi, Benedict. Happy Friday. Farmer says Fridays, not too bad. Puppy, amazing. That's right. Lily Faye, hello, hello. Happy Friday. Look at that puppy. Happy Friday, Benedict. Licking his chops. Only 2 minutes. You're not late at all. I usually end up chatting for the first 15 minutes or so, anyways, so it's not like you're missing any book time. You adjusted your alarm clock so you'd remember. I appreciate that. Thank you. Farmo says TGIF, where the F stands for friends. Oh boy. I am drinking slightly apple flavored water. Water with a little bit of green apple syrup. Farmos had physio today and is therefore sleepy. I just realized that, okay. I was like, hang on a second, my actual Twitch window, I couldn't see myself, it was just black. But I think I just had to refresh it, so hopefully nobody else had any problems there. Well, definitely not, because I know Farmos was seeing Puppy. You took a small child into many stores. Sharky's is tired. Oh boy. Oh boy, says Farmos, and oh boy, says me. Yeah. Were you X-Max shopping? I still have some X-Max shopping to do. Farmos hopes your store searching was fruitful. Need to adjust how I sit so that Puppy is framed properly. There's not much point in doing this stream if I'm sitting in the way of the star. That was Mrs. Sharkey. Had a child critique your baby dinosaur drawing. Rude, child. Unless the baby dinosaur drawing was bad, in which case, you know, I guess in that case you had it coming. As Farmos asks, was it a bad drawing? uh, it didn't even get finished. Oh, that's tragic. Farmos says, to be fair, I'm not totally sure I could draw a baby dinosaur. I mean, you could definitely draw something that would be recognizable as a baby dinosaur. I don't think that you could draw like a realistic baby dinosaur necessarily. I mean, maybe you could. But you could definitely draw like a cartoony one that somebody would look at and go, oh, hey, that's a baby dinosaur. Armo says, maybe draw a dinosaur with baby clothing on. But I don't know, they could actually draw one that was a baby. I think that's similar to what I was saying. You can't type as fast as I speak. Yeah, that's where I've got a little bit of an advantage when we're both thinking the same thing at the same time. So, it's December 10th. We're creeping on towards the end of the year. We are steadily heading towards the end of December and the end of 2021. Soon it will be 2022. What does everyone think of that? Are you ready for 2021 to be over? Sharky say good riddance 2021, booted out the door. This is definitely another one of those years that, you know, it's missing those time landmarks where, like, you know, normal things that break up the flow of the year didn't really take place, and so as a result, I feel like there's just huge chunks of this year that I don't remember. Farmhouse feels like 2020 was worse, but still, yeah. And so, anyways, as a result, it feels like this year was both, you know, long in places, but also just like really short. Like, where did the year go? But this stream has been fun. Started this in what, July, right? I think we started in July with The Hobbit, and then that took a couple of months to read, and then we read Guards. Sharky's feels about the same about 2020 being worse, or about the year feeling like it disappeared. Maybe both. Yeah, started this stream. Lily says time flies when you're having fun. Time flies when you're having fun, and time flies when every day is exactly the same as the others. Both slower and gone, yeah. I've had some fun this year. There have been, you know, bad things. Um, Probably, you know, more than any one year deserves. Especially this area has had some rough moments. Lily says her days went by so fast this year, lost whole months. Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely feel that. But there have been bad things, but I've also had some good stuff and some fun stuff. And the year's not quite over yet. There's still, you know, holiday stuff at the end of the year, which can be, in theory, can be good if you spend your time with good people. You know, the holidays can be nice. I know not everybody has a great time. Lily says, we're still here, which is important. Yes. Sharkies definitely saw this stream as one of the best things that happened to you. Oh. I've been very happy to have you joining me here. I really appreciate that. Just want you to know, Sharkies, I really appreciate you being here so consistently. Like, every week I can count on you being here, you know, unless some big event is happening. So, thank you very much. And Lily, thank you for your support and your help in actually, like, you've helped me learn what I should be doing, even if I'm not doing those things. You've helped me learn, you know, some of the stuff that I can improve on and things like that. And I've taken those tips and used some of them. I just haven't sorted out all the tech side of things. Also got Sharky reading consistently to the kids with The Hobbit. That's really nice. What are you reading now? I know you mentioned, let's see, after The Hobbit. Lily says, I'm good at encouraging, but this has 100% been me and my amazingness. Aw, shucks. I mean, you know, this has just been something I'm doing for fun, right? I enjoy having everybody here and hanging out regularly with folks, and I really have been having a lot of fun sharing these books. Um, Guards was just hilarious, and lots of just me laughing myself silly here at some random thing, even if it was something that wasn't necessarily supposed to be funny. Although most of the time it was at something that was supposed to be funny. Um, Irma says some of her fondest childhood memories are reading with her parents. And The Hobbit is just, The Hobbit's The Hobbit. I always enjoy reading that. And The Hobbit, I think, I found interesting to read on stream. Just picking up on details that I wouldn't necessarily notice regularly if I were just reading through it on my own. Lily loves being read to. It's a huge comfort. On some of your nastiest pain days, people reading to you on the phone while you're laying in the dark was such a reprieve. That's nice of them. I've been having a little bit of pain myself the past couple of days. I went to Kung Fu last night and, started stretching, and I was like, oh, my right calf was really like stiff when I was trying to stretch. And then I started doing the first sort of set, which is called Ma, which means 5-wheel horse in Cantonese. I started doing Ma, and there are some kicks in that set, and I did the kicks, and my ankle just like, my calf just went like seized up, and I was like, oh, what's wrong? So I had to kind of stop and do more stretching. And then I realized that the day before when I was walking Bin, speaking of stretching, the day before when I was walking him, I'd actually kind of rolled my ankle a couple of times, but it didn't really, like I thought it just hadn't affected, like I didn't think it was injured or anything because I just didn't notice it. But then it was quite cold yesterday, and it was cold at Kung Fu. And so I was like, oh, then I remembered rolling my ankle, and I was like, that's what it is. So I took it pretty easy for the rest of the set. I did some more like arm stuff, did some practice with the wooden man, some smacking my arms against if you've seen like the Ip Man movies, he practices with a wooden man a lot. And so we've got one of those, and basically, you practice your blocks and strikes against these pieces of wood, and bash your arms against it, and it toughens up your arms, conditioning. So I did that because that doesn't require my ankle so much. And then when I got home, I had a long hot bath with some Epsom salts, and I'm hoping that helped a bit. Sharkies say, after Hobbit was right, Lion Witch in the Wardrobe, then Harry Potter. Yes, yes, now I am remembering. And now you're reading Tolkien's Letters from Father Christmas. I haven't actually read those. I'm pretty sure I've heard you talk about them, and I've heard others talk about them. That's interesting. How are the kids enjoying that? Is that an interesting read? Is that an entertaining read? I don't think I really would have thought about that. Lane says, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm doing okay. If that sorry was about my ankle, like it'll heal. I don't think it's a full injury, but I do have old injuries that were also kind of stiffening up. My upper thigh gets sore in the cold. Sharky say it's called being over 30. Yeah, yeah. Farmo says, yeah, with like television, there's still a lot you need to do with paying attention to the visuals, but with being read to, you can just let it wash over you, but it's still something that keeps you occupied. It's cold now, yeah. The letters are lovely. That's good, yeah. So this turned sort of into a weird, sappy recap out of nowhere. I wasn't really intending to go into a 2021 in recap, but I'll probably do that again as we get closer to the end of the year. Something I should mention is about 2 hours ago we had a quick power outage here. All the lights went off and everything, and it only lasted like a minute. But if there's wind and rain tonight. We've got a wind warning and a rain warning. So it's possible that I'll lose power again. If that happens, I'm guessing if it happens, it won't be for too long, but that does mean the stream will cut out, and it'll take me a little bit of time in that situation to get the computer fired back up and get back on here. So if I disappear suddenly, that's probably what's happened. Pharma says her injuries are always worse in the cold. Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely got some, I don't know, old torn muscles or something, probably from martial arts, that get sore in the cold. And I'm noticing my hand, my right hand, I'm getting some soreness in here. My grandmother had arthritis, and I, worry that I might follow suit with that, but I don't know. Shucky say the letters, being actual letters he wrote to his kids, are a bit slow at first, but then as his kids get older, he starts adding characters. Makes for some fun out loud reading and some really adorable illustrations. The North Polar Bear is one of the most central. That sounds fun. A little weird, like reading letters from like a father to his kids. Like, not really weird, but like, I don't know. It feels like maybe it's a little personal. I guess if he was intending to share them with others. Okay, so it's 7:15. Why don't we talk about this book that we're reading? Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. Book 1 of the Belgariad. So we finished chapter 3, chapters 2 and 3 on the last stream, which introduced the storyteller, now known as Mr. Wolf by Garion. And Mr. Wolf was quite pleased to receive that name, to be called Mr. Wolf. He said that was one of his favorite names that he'd received in quite a long time. And I feel like that was kind of a nice moment. And so I think a fair amount of time was spent establishing the character of Mr. Wolf as sort of this mischievous, friendly thief. I love that bit of him like being offered a plate of cookies and oh no, I couldn't, but then stealing the cookies before the plate is withdrawn. Like it's just so, I don't know, the like stealing something that you're being offered, just as stealing for the sake of stealing, to be a, I don't know, not a jerk maybe, but that was kind of a funny moment. And Mr. Wolf told a story of the beginnings that apparently is only ever told in the presence of kings. But he said, kings haven't spent much time paying attention to that story recently, and sometimes you need to tell a story just to stay in practice, and who knows where a king might be hiding. Then Mr. Wolf took Garion by wagon to the village of Upper Gralt to fetch some spices for Aunt Pole. He had some other reason to go there, it sounded like, and he fetched the spices while they were at it, although they didn't actually mention him doing much else besides having a meal in the tavern and then going to get the spices and then encountering a Murgo merchant. Was the Murgo actually named? I don't remember. Looks like they just called him the Murgo. Yeah, Parmos doesn't think so. Who had a couple of Thull porters outside. And then Murgo asked Garion some questions, and Garion and Mr. Wolf both deftly lied about their identities. The Murgo tried to give Garion an Angarak penny, threw it on the ground, but Mr. Wolf snatched it up and swapped it with a Sendarian penny. I think it was a Sendarian one. I don't think that matters too much. Didn't let Garion have the Angarak penny, claiming that that sometimes Angarak money isn't what it seems to be. And then, as Garion was kind of dozing at the end of the book, Mr. Wolf and Aunt Pole had a bit of a conversation that sort of hinted at aspects of their relationship with each other. About a responsibility and a care that they had placed upon them. And then Mr. Wolf said that he was going to be gone for some years. And part of that was saying that if the Murgo was a Grolim, we'll let him follow him. I'm sure I can give him several months of entertainment. So, they definitely both know more than they let on to Garion. And the next morning when he awoke, Mr. Wolf was gone. And so that's where we're at now. Yeah, I think that's probably most of the important bits from the last couple of chapters. Unless anyone else remembers anything significant that they think I should mention that I might have missed. I need to have a shower. My hair's getting kind of tangled. I can only really comb it out when I've got conditioner in it in the shower. Otherwise, a comb's just not getting through there. Barely get my fingers through there, to be honest. Well, I should probably get going, huh? Let's read. Let's get into chapter 4. Chapter 4. Yeah. Look at those words on that paper. Holy moly. Hopefully I can remember all the correct voices. I worry about, like, with guards, by the time we got further into the book, I definitely had, some of the voices, I'm out of focus, pretty cemented to the point where I could fall into them pretty easily. But I haven't done some of these voices out loud quite enough to know for certain that I will remember them all. I need to rewatch some of the videos before ahead of time to make sure that I get the voices right or something. Alright, chapter 4. The seasons turned, as seasons will. Summer ripened into autumn, the blaze of autumn died into winter. Winter grudgingly relented to the urgency of spring, and spring bloomed into summer again. With the turning of the seasons, the years turned, and Garion, imperceptibly, grew older. As he grew, the other children grew as well. All except poor Dorun, who seemed doomed to be short and skinny all his life. Runderig sprouted like a young tree, and was soon almost as big as any man on the farm. Zubret, of course, did not grow so tall, but she developed in other ways which the boys began to find interesting. In the early autumn, just before Garion's 14th birthday, it's been 5 years, he's gone from 9 to almost 14. In the early autumn, just before Garion's 14th birthday, he came very close to ending his career. In response to some primal urge all children have, given a pond and a handy supply of logs, They had built a raft that summer. The raft was neither very large, nor was it particularly well built. It had a tendency to sink on one end if the weight aboard it was improperly distributed, and an alarming habit of coming apart at unexpected moments. Quite naturally, it was Geryon who was aboard the raft, showing off, on that fine autumn day when the raft quite suddenly decided once and for all to revert to its original state. The bindings all came undone, and the logs began to go their separate ways. Realizing his danger only at the last moment, Geryon made a desperate effort to pull for shore, but his haste only made the disintegration of his craft more rapid. In the end, he found himself standing on a single log, his arms windmilling wildly in a futile effort to retain his balance, his eyes, desperately searching for some aid, swept the marshy shore. Some distance up the slope, behind his playmates, he saw the familiar figure of the man on the black horse. The man wore a dark robe, and his burning eyes watched the boy's plight. Then the spiteful log rolled under Geryon's feet, and he toppled and fell with a resounding splash. Geryon's education, unfortunately, had not included instruction in the art of swimming, and while the water was not really very deep, it was deep enough. The bottom of the pond was very unpleasant. A kind of dark, weedy ooze inhabited by frogs, turtles, and a singularly unsavory-looking eel that slithered away snake-like when Geryon plunged like a sinking rock into the weeds. Geryon struggled, gulped water, and launched himself with his legs toward the surface again. Like a broaching whale, he rose from the depths, gasped a couple of quick, sputtering breaths, and heard the screams of his playmates. The dark figure on the slope had not moved, and for a single instant every detail of that bright afternoon was etched on Geryon's mind. He even observed that, although the rider was in the open under the full glare of the autumn sun, neither man nor horse cast any shadow. Even as his mind grappled with that impossibility, he sank once more to the murky bottom. The murky bottom. Eesh. It occurred to him as he struggled, drowning, amongst the weeds, that if he could launch himself up in the vicinity of the log, he might catch hold of it and so remain afloat. He waved off a startled-looking frog and plunged upward again. He came up, unfortunately, directly under the log. The blow on the top of his head filled his eyes with light and his ears with a roaring sound, and he sank, no longer struggling, back toward the weeds which seemed to reach up for him. The Sharkies say the murky bottom, great name for a disreputable pub. Most of my D&D games will at some point or another contain the brass bucket. That actually goes back quite a long time, back to when I was like 13 years old, prior to learning and playing D&D. Frymos didn't know it went that far. Oh yeah. I know exactly where it goes back to. And then Dernick was there. Garion felt himself lifted roughly by the hair toward the surface, and then towed by that same convenient handle toward shore behind Dernick's powerfully churning strokes. The smith pulled the semi-conscious boy out onto the bank, turned him over, and stepped on him several times to force the water out of his lungs. That's some crude CPR right there. Just flop you over and then step on you. If it works. And then Farmo says, if it works. Yep. We're too in sync tonight. Garion's ribs creaked. Enough, Dernick, he gasped finally. He sat up, and the blood from the splendid cut on top of his head immediately ran into his eyes. He wiped the blood clear and looked around for the dark, shadowless rider, but the figure had vanished. He tried to get up, but the world suddenly spun around him, and he fainted. When he awoke, Sharky say creaked, more like cracked. Yikes. The creak comes just before the crack. When he awoke, he was in his own bed, with his head wrapped in bandages. Aunt Pole stood beside his bed, her eyes blazing. "You stupid boy!" she cried. "What were you doing in that pond?" "Rafting," Garion said, trying to make it sound quite ordinary. "Rafting?" she said. "Rafting? Who gave you permission?" "Well," he said uncertainly, "You just what?" He looked at her helplessly. And then, with a low cry, she took him in her arms and crushed him to her almost suffocatingly. The Sharky's quoting, "The creak comes before the crack." Farmost has bruised a rib or two before using an ill-fitting corset and thinks rib injuries are awful. Hurting every time you breathe sucks. Yeah. Oof. It's getting very windy outside. I can hear it through the windows. Briefly, Garion considered telling her about the strange, shadowless figure that had watched his struggles in the pond. But the dry voice in his mind that sometimes spoke to him told him that this was not the time for that. He seemed to know, somehow, that the business between him and the man on the black horse was something very private, and that the time would inevitably come when they would face each other in some kind of contest of will or deed. To speak of it now to Aunt Pole would involve her in the matter, and he did not want that. He was not sure exactly why, but he did know that the dark figure was an enemy. And though that thought was a bit frightening, it was also exciting. There was no question that Aunt Pole could deal with this stranger, but if she did, Garion knew that he would lose something very personal and for some reason very important. And so, he said nothing. That's mysterious, isn't it? Sharkies ran into a wheelbarrow handle and had bruised ribs for a few months. Oof. Ow. Farmhouse says the corset was a friend's and she was a bit smaller than Farmhouse. It almost fit. Trying to make it actually fit was a mistake. Oof. Though I think that last oof was for the wheelbarrow handle. Those both sound unfun. "It really wasn't anything all that dangerous, Aunt Pole," he said instead, rather lamely. I was starting to get the idea of how to swim. I'd have been all right if I hadn't hit my head on that log." "But of course you did hit your head," she pointed out. Well, yes, but it wasn't that serious. I'd have been all right in a minute or two. Under the circumstances, I'm not sure you had a minute or two, she said bluntly. Well, he faltered, and then decided to let it drop. Oh, Garion. Sometime soon I'm going to have to start changing his voice. That marked the end of Garion's freedom. Aunt Pole confined him to the scullery. He grew to know every dent and scratch on every pot in the kitchen intimately. He once estimated gloomily that he had washed each one 21 times a week. In a seeming orgy of messiness, Aunt Pole suddenly could not even boil water without dirtying at least 3 or 4 pans, and Garion had to scrub every one. That's impressive. Farmo says maybe Garion's voice will also creak before it cracks. That was a puberty joke. Ba-dum-ts. He hated it and began to think quite seriously of running away. As autumn progressed and the weather began to deteriorate, the other children were also more or less confined to the compound as well. And it wasn't so bad. Runderig, of course, was seldom with them anymore, since his man's size had made him, even more than Garion, subject to more and more frequent labor. When he could, Garion slipped away to be with Zubret and Dorun, but they no longer found much entertainment in leaping into the hay or in the endless games of tag in the stables and barns. They had reached an age and size where adults rather quickly noticed such idleness and found tasks to occupy them. Most often they would sit in some out-of-the-way place and simply talk. Which is to say that Garion and Zubret would sit and listen to the endless flow of Dorun's chatter. That small, quick boy, as unable to be quiet as he was to sit still, could seemingly talk for hours about a half-dozen raindrops, and his words tumbled out breathlessly as he fidgeted. "What's that mark on your hand, Garion?" Zubret asked one rainy day, interrupting Dorun's bubbling voice. Garion looked at the perfectly round, white patch on the palm of his right hand. "I've noticed it too," Dorun said, quickly changing subjects in mid-sentence. "But Garion grew up in the kitchen, didn't you, Garion? It's probably a place where he burned himself when he was little, you know, reached out before anyone could stop him and put his hand on something hot. I'll bet his Aunt Pole got really angry about that, because she can get angrier faster than anybody I've ever seen, and she can really—" "It's always been there," Garion said, tracing the mark on his palm with his left forefinger. How was that for Dorun? I think that's the first line he's actually had. I think that's actually the first lines both Zubret and Dorun have had. "It's always been there," Garion said, tracing the mark on his palm with his left forefinger. He had never really looked closely at it before. It covered the entire palm of his hand, and had, in certain light, a faint silvery sheen. "Maybe it's a birthmark," Zubret suggested. "I'll bet that's it," Dorun said quickly. "I saw a man once that had a big purple one on the side of his face, one of those wagoneers that comes by to pick up the turnip crop in the fall. Anyway, the mark was all over the side of his face, and I thought it was a big bruise at first, and thought that he must have been in an awful fight. Those wagoneers fight all the time. But then I saw it wasn't really a bruise, but, like Zubret just said, it was a birthmark. I wonder what causes things like that." That evening, after he'd gotten ready for bed, he asked his aunt about it. "What's this mark, Aunt Pole?" he asked, holding his hand up, palm out. She looked up from where she was brushing her long, dark hair. "It's nothing to worry about," she told him. "I wasn't worried about it," he said. "I just wondered what it was. Zibret and Dorun think it's a birthmark. Is that what it is?" "Something like that," she said. "Did either of my parents have the same kind of mark?" "Your father did. It's been in the family for a long time." A sudden strange thought occurred to Geryon. Without knowing why, he reached out with the hand and touched the white lock at his aunt's brow. "Is it like that white place in your hair?" he asked. He felt a sudden tingle in his hand, and it seemed somehow that a window opened in his mind. At first there was only the sense of uncountable years moving by like a vast sea of ponderously rolling clouds, and then, sharper than any knife, a feeling of endlessly repeated loss, of sorrow. Then, more recent, there was his own face, and behind it more faces, old, young, regal, or quite ordinary, and behind them all, no longer foolish as it sometimes seemed, the face of Mr. Wolf. But more than anything, there was a knowledge of an unearthly, inhuman power, the certainty of an unconquerable will. Aunt Pole moved her head away almost absently. "Don't do that, Geryon," she said, and the window in his mind shut. "What was it?" he asked, burning with curiosity and wanting to open the window again. "A simple trick," she said. "Show me how." "Not yet, my Geryon," she said, taking his face between her hands. "Not yet. You're not ready yet. Now, go to bed." "You'll be here?" he asked, a little frightened now. "I'll always be here," she said, tucking him in. And then she went back to brushing her long, thick hair, humming a strange song as she did in a deep, melodious voice, and to that sound he fell asleep. After that, not even Geryon himself saw the mark on his own palm very often. There suddenly seemed to be all kinds of dirty jobs for him to do, which kept not only his hands, but the rest of him as well, very dirty. The most important holiday in Sindaria, and indeed in the rest of the kingdoms of the West, was Erastide. It commemorated that day, eons before, when the 7 gods joined hands to create the world with a single word. The festival of Erastide took place in midwinter, and, because there was little to do on a farm like Faldor's at that season, it had by custom become a splendid 2-week celebration, with feasts and gifts and decorations in the dining hall and little pageants honoring the gods. These last, of course, were a reflection of Faldor's piety. You've got Mia singing the theme to Spirited Away in the background. Oh, that's so sweet. Faldor, though he was a good, simple man, had no illusions about how widely his sentiments were shared by others on the farm. He thought, however, that some outward show of devotional activity was in keeping with the season, and, because he was such a good master, the people on his farm chose to humor him. It was also at this season, unfortunately, that Faldor's married daughter, Anhelda, and her husband, Eilbrig, made their customary annual visit to remain on speaking terms with her father. Anhelda had no intention of endangering her inheritance rights by seeming inattention. Her visits, however, were a trial to Faldor, who looked upon his daughter's somewhat overdressed and supercilious husband, a minor functionary in a commercial house in the capital city of Sendar, with scarcely concealed contempt. Their arrival, however, marked the beginning of the Erastide festival at Faldor's farm. So, while no one cared for them personally, their appearance was always greeted with a certain enthusiasm. Pharma says, those are some intense names. Anhelda and Eilbrig. I might need to get some more water soon. The weather that year had been particularly foul, even for Sandaria. I feel that. Is it weird that Sandaria kind of reminds me of Canada a little bit? You know, it's sort of like a melting pot of all different peoples and, I don't know, farming and just sort of solid, like, the virtues, I don't know. Plus the weather. The rains had settled in early and were soon followed by a period of soggy snow. Sounds like Canada to me right now. Not the crisp, bright powder which came later in the winter, but a damp slush, always half melting. For Garion, whose duties in the kitchen now prevented him from joining with his former playmates in their traditional pre-holiday orgy of anticipatory excitement. A mouthful there. The approaching holiday seemed somehow flat and stale. He yearned back to the good old days, and often sighed with regret and moped about the kitchen like a sandy-haired cloud of doom. Poor Garion, he's so hard done by. Sandy-haired cloud of doom. Farmo says, emo. Even the traditional decorations in the dining hall, where Erastide festivities always took place, seemed decidedly tacky to him that year. The fir bows festooning the ceiling beams were somehow not as green, and the polished apples carefully tied to the bows were smaller and not as red. He sighed some more and reveled in his sullen moping. Farmo says he dyes his hair black, keeps one eye covered with it. There, like that. Maybe I should do the other one. There. Aunt Pole, however, was not impressed. Surprise, surprise. And her attitude was firmly unsympathetic. She routinely checked his brow with her hands for signs of fever, and then dosed him with the foulest tasting tonic she could concoct. Aunt Pole has no chill. Garion was careful, after that, to mope in private and to sigh less audibly. He's very practical in his emo-ness. He's like, I want to be gloomy, but I don't want to suffer for it. Farmo says she gives no hex about teenage angst. All right. That dry, secret part of his mind informed him matter-of-factly that he was being ridiculous, but Garion chose not to listen. The voice in his mind was much older and wiser than he, but it seemed determined to take all the fun out of life. On the morning of Erastide, a mergo and 5 thulls appeared with a wagon outside the gate and asked to see Faldor. Geryon, who had long since learned that no one pays attention to a boy and that many interesting things may be learned by placing himself in a position to casually overhear conversations, busied himself with some small, unimportant chore near the gate. The mergo, his face scarred much like the face of the one in Upper Grault, sat importantly on the wagon seat, his chainmail shirt clinking each time he moved. He wore a black, hooded robe, and his sword was much in evidence. His eyes moved constantly, taking in everything. The thulls, in muddy felt boots and heavy cloaks, lounged disinterestedly against the wagon, seemingly indifferent to the raw wind whipping across the snowy fields. Faldor, in his finest doublet, it was, after all, Erastide, came across the yard, closely followed by Anhelda and Eilbrig. "Good morrow, friend," Faldor said to the mergo. "Joyous Erastide to you." The mergo grunted. "I take it you're the farmer Faldor?" he asked in his heavily accented voice. Heavily accented. Gotta work on that. What does a mergo accent sound like? I don't want to just try and mimic an Earth accent because that seems distasteful. But also, making up my own accent isn't easy either. "I am," Faldor replied. "I understand you have a goodly number of hams on hand, well cured." "The pigs did well this year," Faldor answered modestly. "I'll buy them," the mergo announced, jingling his purse. Faldor bowed. "First thing tomorrow morning," he said. The mergo stared. "This is a pious household," Faldor explained. "We don't offend the gods by breaking the sanctity of Erastide." "Father," Anhelda snapped, "don't be foolish. This noble merchant has come a long way to do business." "Not on Erastide," Faldor said stubbornly, his long face firm. "In the city of Sendar," Eilbrig said in his rather high-pitched nasal voice, "we do not let such sentimentality interfere with business." "This is not the city of Sendar," Faldor said flatly. "This is Faldor's farm, and on Faldor's farm we do no work and conduct no business on Erastide." "Father," Anhelda protested, "the noble merchant has gold. Gold, father, gold!" Wow. Come on, Anhelda. "I won't hear any more of it," Faldor announced. He turned to the mergo. "You and your servants are welcome to join us in our celebration, friend," he said. "We can provide quarters for you and the promise of the finest dinner in all of Sendaria, and the opportunity to honor the gods on this special day. No man is made poorer by attending to his religious obligations." "We do not observe this holiday in Cthulmergos," the scar-faced man said coldly. "As the noble lady says, I've come a long way to do business, and have not much time to tarry. I'm sure there are other farmers in the district with the merchandise I require." "Father!" Anhelda wailed. "I know my neighbors," Faldor said quietly. "Your luck today will be small, I fear. The observance of this day is a firm tradition in this area." Parmo says, "Buy me more jewelry!" That's Anhelda. The Sharkies say, even if it weren't a holiday, Anhelda has no chill about negotiating. He has gold, Father! Gold! Gold! Oh, boy. The Murgo thought for a moment. Like, geez, girl, learn to barter. Gold! The Murgo thought for a moment. It may be as you say, he said finally. I'll accept your invitation, provided that we can do business as early as possible tomorrow. Faldor bowed. I'll place myself at your service at first light tomorrow, if you so desire. Done, then, the Murgo said, climbing down from his wagon. That afternoon, the feast was laid in the dining hall. The kitchen helpers, and a half-dozen others who had been pressed into service for the special day, scurried from kitchen to hall bearing smoking roasts, steaming hams, and sizzling geese, all under the lash of Aunt Pole's tongue. Geryon observed sourly, as he struggled with an enormous baron of beef, that Faldor's prohibition of work on Erastide stopped at the kitchen door. I feel like that's a whole mood. I don't know. In time, all was ready. The tables were loaded, the fires in the fireplaces burned brightly. Dozens of candles filled the hall with golden light, and torches flared in their rings on the stone pillars. Sharky say, Faldor, a man. We do no work on Erastide. All the women, working. It's a weird thing about holidays, huh? Like, being like, oh yes, it's a national holiday. Nobody works on this day or whatever. But then, of course, there are people working. There will always be people working. Farmo says it's not real work if it's housework. Sarcasm. Everybody's got to eat. Torches flared in their rings on the stone pillars. Faldor's people, all in their best clothes, filed into the hall, their mouths watering in anticipation. When all were seated, Faldor rose from his bench at the head of the center table. Sharky say mostly the undervalued working, and Farmo says it's not real work if it's retail. Gold, Father, gold! Faldor rose from his bench at the head of the center table. Dear friends, he said, lifting his tankard, I dedicate this feast to the gods. The gods, people responded in unison, rising respectfully. Faldor drank briefly, and they all followed suit. Hear me, O gods, he prayed. Most humbly we thank you for the bounty of this fair world which you made on this day, and we dedicate ourselves to your service for yet another year. He looked for a moment as if he were going to say more, but then sat down instead. Faldor always labored for many hours over special prayers for occasions such as this, but the agony of speaking in public invariably erased the words so carefully prepared from his mind. Poor Faldor. His prayers, therefore, were always very sincere and very short. Farmo says, I'm going to think of her, Anhelda. Now, every time I think about people being like, I want to shop on my holiday days off. I've got gold. Father, gold. I don't know why I need to shake my head like this every time I say gold. Gold! It's fun. Try it. Eat, dear friends, he instructed. Don't let the food grow cold. Pharmacist's neck is sore, so won't try it. And so they ate. Anhelda and Albrig, who joined them all at this one meal only at Faldor's insistence, devoted their conversational efforts to the Murgo, since he was the only one in the room who was worthy of their attention. I have long thought of visiting Thol Murgos, Albrig stated rather pompously. Don't you agree, friend merchant, that greater contact between East and West is the way to overcome those mutual suspicions which have so marred our relationships in the past? Don't let the food grow cold. Did somebody say gold? Gold, father? Oh, boy. I feel like she's getting more and more nasally every time I do that. We Murgos prefer to keep to ourselves, the scar-faced man said shortly. But you are here, friend, Albrig pointed out. Doesn't that suggest that greater contact might prove beneficial? I'm here as a duty, the Murgo said. I don't visit here out of preference. He looked around the room. Are these, then, all of your people? He asked Faldor. Every soul is here, Faldor told him. I was led to believe there was an old man here, with white hair and a beard. Not here, friend, Faldor said. I myself am the eldest here, and as you can see, my hair is far from white. One of my countrymen met such a one some years ago, the Murgo said. He was accompanied by an Arendish boy. Runderig, I believe his name was. Garion, seated at the next table, kept his face to his plate and listened so hard that he thought his ears must be growing. Farmo says, uh-oh. We have a boy named Runderig here, Faldor said. That tall lad at the end of the far table over there. He pointed. No, the Murgo said, looking hard at Runderig. That isn't the boy who was described to me. Sharky say, if you weren't suspicious of him before, the extreme details this guy brings up in casual conversation is worrying. Whatever could you mean? No, this is very normal. It's not an uncommon name among the Errands, Faldor said. Quite probably your friend met a pair from another farm. That must be it, the Murgo said, seeming to dismiss the affair. This ham is excellent, he said, pointing at his plate with the point of his dagger with which he ate. Are the ones in your smokehouse of similar quality? Oh, no, friend merchant, Faldor laughed. You won't so easily trick me into talking business on this day. The Murgo smiled briefly, the expression appearing strange on his scarred face. One can always try, he said. I would, however, compliment your cook. A compliment for you, Mistress Pole, Faldor said, raising his voice slightly. Our friend from Cthul Murgos finds your cooking much to his liking. I thank him for his compliment, Aunt Pole said, somewhat coldly. The Murgo looked at her, and his eyes widened slightly as if in recognition. A noble meal, great lady, he said, bowing slightly in her direction. Your kitchen is a place of magic. No, she said, her voice suddenly very haughty. Not magic. Cooking's an art which anyone with patience may learn. Magic is quite something else. But magic is also an art, great lady, the Murgo said. There are many who think so, Aunt Pole said. But true magic comes from within, and isn't the result of nimble fingers which trick the eye. The Murgo stared at her, his face hard, and she returned his gaze with steely eyes. To Geryon, sitting nearby, it seemed as if something had passed between them that had nothing to do with the words that they spoke. A kind of challenge seemed to hang in the air. And then the Murgo looked away, almost as if he feared to take up that challenge. The Sharkies say, tense discussions about ham. When the meal was over, it was time for the rather simple pageant which traditionally marked Erastide. Farmo says they're real serious about it at Faldor's farm. 7 of the older farmhands, who had slipped away earlier, appeared in the doorway wearing the long, hooded robes and carefully carved and painted masks which represented the faces of the gods. The costumes were old and showed the wrinkles which were the result of having been packed away in Faldor's attic for the past year. With a slow step, the robed and masked figures paced into the hall and lined up at the foot of the table where Faldor sat. Then, each in turn spoke a short piece which identified the god he represented. I am Aldor, Kralto's voice came from behind the first mask. The god who dwells alone, and I command this world to be. Sharkies say, Faldor, we don't work on Erastide. Actors. Working. This isn't work. This is a religious observance. I am Beldar, came another familiar voice from behind the second mask. Bear god of the Alorns, and I command this world to be. They ham it up, say the Sharkies. Womp womp. Farmo says it doesn't count if you don't pay them. Wow. Bear god of the Alorns, and I command this world to be. And so it went down the line. Chaldan, Issa, Nedra, Mara, and then finally the last figure, which, unlike the others, was robed in black, and whose mask was made of steel instead of painted wood. The Sharkies say they're paid in exposure. I am Torak, Dernick's voice came hollowly from behind the mask. Dragon god of the Angarax, and I command this world to be. A movement caught Geryon's eye, and he looked quickly. The Murgo had covered his face with his hands in a strange, almost ceremonial gesture. Beyond him, at the far table, the 5 Thulls were ashen-faced and trembling. The 7 figures at the foot of Faldor's table joined their hands. We are the gods, they said in unison, and we command this world to be. Hearken unto the words of the gods, Faldor declaimed. Welcome are the gods in the house of Faldor. The blessing of the gods be upon the house of Faldor, the 7 responded, and upon all this company. And then they turned, and, as slowly as they had come, they paced from the hall. And then came the gifts. There was much excitement at this, for the gifts were all from Faldor, and the good farmer struggled long each year to provide the most suitable gift for each of his people. That's nice. New tunics and hose and gowns and shoes were much in evidence. But Geryon this year was nearly overwhelmed when he opened a smallish, cloth-wrapped bundle and found a neat, well-sheathed dagger. "He's nearly a man," Faldor explained to Aunt Pole, "and a man always has need of a good knife." Geryon, of course, immediately tested the edge of his gift and quite promptly managed to cut his finger. "It was inevitable, I suppose," Aunt Pole said, but whether she was speaking of the cut, or the gift itself, or the fact of Geryon's growing up, was not entirely clear. Farmer says, "That's intense. I'm struggling with like six gifts." Sharky say, "You also don't own a mamor." Oof, of course he did, said... Oh, of course he did, says Farmos. Sharky's correct to manor. Farmer says, "That's true, but I also don't run a manor." The Murgo bought his hams the next morning, and he and the 5 thulls departed. A few days later, Anhelda and Eilbrig packed up and left on their return journey to the city of Sendar, and Faldor's farm returned to normal. Sharky say he pays people to on the days he doesn't work. Oh, I missed Farmos's. I was trying to puzzle that out, but that's because I missed Farmos saying I don't know where he'd have the time. I see. The winter plodded on. The snows came and went, and spring returned, as it always does. That's true. I don't know. Sometimes when the weather is particularly nasty, I have to remind myself that it'll pass. Eventually the good days will come back. The nice weather will come back. Farmo says, "Yeah, I guess when you're wealthy enough you can have personal shoppers." I wonder where the shopping actually gets done. The only thing which made that spring any different from any other was the arrival of Brill, the new hand. One of the younger farmers had married and rented a small nearby croft, and had left, laden down with practical gifts and good advice from Faldor to begin his life as a married man. Brill was hired to replace him. Geryon found Brill to be a definitely unattractive addition to the farm. The man's tunic and hose were patched and stained, his black hair and scraggly beard were unkempt, and one of his eyes looked off in a different direction from its fellow. He was a sour, solitary man, and he was none too clean. He seemed to carry with him an acrid reek of stale sweat that hung in his vicinity like a miasma. After a few attempts at conversation, Geryon gave up and avoided him. The boy, however, had other things to occupy his mind during that spring and summer. Though he had until then considered her to be more an inconvenience than a genuine playmate, quite suddenly he began to notice Zubret. Oh boy. He had always known that she was pretty, but until that particular season, that fact had been unimportant, and he had much preferred the company of Runderig and Darun. Now, matters had changed. He noticed that the 2 other boys had also begun to pay more attention to her as well, and for the first time he began to feel the stirrings of jealousy. Oh boy. Zubret, of course, flirted outrageously with all 3 of them, and positively glowed when they glared at each other in her presence. Runderig's duties in the fields kept him away most of the time, but Dorune was a serious worry to Geryon. He became quite nervous and frequently found excuses to go about the compound to make certain that Dorune and Zubret were not alone together. His own campaign was charmingly simple. He resorted to bribery. Zubret, like all little girls, oh boy, was fond of sweets, and Geryon had access to the entire kitchen. In a short period of time, they had worked out an arrangement. Sharky say not actually the envious position that male authors seem to think it is. Only hen in the rooster house. I wonder. Zubret definitely is kind of described as having that, like having a manipulative, personality that enjoys the limelight. I don't know if that's a fair description or anything like that, but that's just sort of, I think, how she is described as being. In a short period of time, they had worked out an arrangement. You ready for this? Geryon would steal sweets from the kitchen for his sunny-haired playmate, and in return she would let him kiss her. Wow. Things might perhaps have gone further if Aunt Pole had not caught them in the midst of such an exchange one bright summer afternoon in the seclusion of the hay barn. "That's quite enough of that," she announced firmly from the doorway. Geryon jumped guiltily away from Zubret. "I've got something in my eye," Zubret lied quickly. "Geryon was trying to get it out for me." Geryon stood blushing furiously. "Really?" Aunt Pole said. "How interesting. Come with me, Geryon." He started. "Now, Geryon." And that was the end of that. Geryon's time thereafter was totally occupied in the kitchen, and Aunt Pole's eyes seemed to be on him every moment. He mooned about a great deal, and worried desperately about Dorune, who now appeared hatefully smug. But Aunt Pole remained watchful, and Geryon remained in the kitchen. Sharky say Aunt Pole rooster blocking. That's the end of chapter 4 on page 56 out of 262. And it's almost 20 after 8, so that is definitely a good place to stop. This chapter was a little longer. Sharky say not very sanitary to moon about. Farmo says, poor kid, but I'm sure he can do better. Oh, come on, don't be mean. I'm sure Zubret is a very nice girl. They're just all kids. Some awkwardness in that chapter. And some interesting stuff. That Murgo showing up at Erastide with some piercing questions, and the exchange between the Murgo and Aunt Pole. Farmo says, yeah, I guess. They're young teens after all. A little pageant. The rider on the dark horse, who now we know has no shadow. That's interesting. And the voice in Geryon's mind. The dry voice, which is now being described as being older than Geryon. A lot of little things kind of coming together. Little tidbits. There are some weaknesses to the writing in these books. I don't want to pretend that the books are perfect, that the writing is perfect. There's some weirdness, I feel like you've got some situations of like people's physical traits defining their moral traits, maybe, which I'm not fond of. And you definitely have, like, I mean, you've got the people from different countries are going to behave differently, but I feel like somewhat that's excused by the nature of the world itself, because the people in this world aren't so much defined by where they're from so much as their gods. Um, so I think that that somewhat mitigates the like blatant racism, really, because it's just kind of a like these people followed different gods or were chosen by different gods, and then the gods shaped them to be a certain way. Pharma says some late 80s sexism. I mean, you've also got Aunt Pole. Like, not to say that that isn't there, not to say there isn't sexism in the books, but I do think there are also strong female characters in these books as well. Multiple strong female characters. You haven't met them all yet, but I do think that's there. Oh, you say she's the exception rather than the rule. See, I know I was talking before you were typing, but uh, I mean, there. How many female characters have there been so far? There haven't been many, and sure, I'm sure like that is a weakness that there are not as many. Um, but there are more strong female characters to come. Yeah, quite a few actually. Honestly, even some of the ones that aren't like primary characters, there are just secondary female characters that come up that I think are also quite strong. Um, the whole woman's work isn't real work style deal. What with the kitchen thing? I mean, I think that the kitchen gets a lot of respect in on Baldor's farm, and I mean we're talking a lot about, you know, like Garion calls out himself that the no work on Erastide stops in the kitchen, and that's the only real reason we started kind of talking about it is because Gary, like because the book itself points it out and Garion points it out, and I think that's just kind of the nature of the world. Like, holidays where nobody works, well, people still have to eat, and on holidays people have feasts, and so yes, people think nobody works, but of course that's not true. The writing does seem concerned with race in a way that I'm not used to from modern writing. Yeah, and I mean, that is definitely a thing. Um, and will continue to be a thing in these books. You know, people from different places are different from each other. Um, and like I said, there's a reason for that, but it's not necessarily the part. Like, it lends an interesting aspect to the books in some regards, and I do feel like, for the most part, most places, almost every place, is there's a balance of good characteristics and bad characteristics. Even with Sendarians, which, Sendarians are a good, solid people, and they're very practical and reliable, but they're also unimaginative and maybe too honest at times. And I think that people from different places in these books mostly are all sort of described. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to find the good. Sometimes the bad parts are more obvious, such as the errands being slow as a result of all that nobility. But there will be interesting errandish characters, I promise. Some very interesting errandish characters. Um, but then you've got the Anchораx and Torak and I don't know. We'll see. There is quite a large cast of characters to come. The first few chapters here are all centered on Faldor's farm, and as a result, you've just got the cast of Faldor's farm. and then, some outsiders that come and go. But spoiler warning, there will be travel, and many, many more characters. And that's something I really like about these books, is the variety of characters and all of the interactions and such. So I'm looking forward to getting to that in future chapters. But yes, there is definitely. You do like a good travel narrative? What? No. You don't enjoy books like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings? Basically travel blogs, as we established. I mean, then again, Guards had very little, almost no travel, so. But that was still good. Well, I hope that we didn't turn too negative on this. But that said, yeah. No, I do acknowledge that there are problems, but I also am. It's hard for me not to be stubborn about it because I do love these books, and so I'm like, on the one hand, I'm talking about the problems with these books, and then on the other hand, somebody else mentions a problem, and I'm like, no, that's not a real problem. Get out of here with that. Okay. Well, I'm a little hungry. I think I'm gonna have something small to eat. But yeah. Is Lily still here? Does Lily have someone I should raid? It says away, so possibly not. Check. You say honest criticism doesn't mean we can't love a thing. Yeah, I need to work on being less defensive about that sometimes. It's easy for me to I say easy, but I have to be careful not to slip into being blind to problems with things like that myself. I do think that the writing in these books does avoid some troublesome narrative tropes that you get in some books. Um, Mostly, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I hope everyone enjoys the book. You know, obviously, I want people to like it, but I think that's enough for tonight because it's almost 8:30. So why don't we call it? And I hope everyone has a good weekend. I hope the rain doesn't cause too much. The rain and wind doesn't cause too much problems. I'm glad that we didn't have a power outage again, because that would have been kind of annoying. Yeah. Have a good weekend. 10th, 11th, 12th, and I'll see you next Wednesday. We can get on to what, chapter 5, right? And see what's going to happen next. Considering the usual bikini warrior on the side of a van fantasy of the 1980s, this does seem better. Yeah. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. Good luck with any further shopping you've got to do. I've got to figure some of that out myself. All right. Good night. See you Wednesday.